Hello. Wherever you are in the world today, thank you for joining us for the Rise Traveler, unpacking conversations of sustainable travel. We're here to move a step beyond the Instagram-ready world of travel and think critically and deeply about how travel can uplift global communities, protect natural ecosystems, and be a source of growth for travelers. Here at Rise Travel Institute, we are committed to empowering travelers and travel professionals through education. Our programs, research, experiential journeys, scholarships, and free resources are all aimed at bringing you closer to a more responsible and ethical travel experience. Learn more by visiting risetravelinstitute.org.
I'm your host, Amy Hagar. And with me today is someone who I've gotten to know so long. We were a part of the original volunteer team here at Rise. Joining me from DC is Cara King. So Cara, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Amy. Great to see you again.
Yeah, I feel like this is going to kind of be a catch-up conversation for us, but also we'll dive in a little bit deeper on some experiences that I'm super excited to really go into. But knowing that it's been, 4-ish, 5-ish years now at this point that you've been at Rise, why did you originally volunteer with Rise? What keeps you here? And even do you remember on how you found out about Rise?
Yes, so it was definitely impactful. So I remember the day I found out about it, because obviously I've been here 4 or 5 years now, so it made a big impact on my life.
Yeah.
So I found out about Rise through the organization Wonderful, who they're a women's travel community. I initially was a writer for them and then became a member afterwards. They were having a virtual summit early on. It was in 2020. I remember because I was home during the pandemic,
Yeah.
and I stayed on for about pretty much a lot. They had some really great discussions, and I stayed on for about, I think, almost the end of the entire summit. And towards my day at that meeting, you'd think that maybe I'd be like, okay, time to log off soon.
Yeah.
But it was so engaging. And one of the last conversations I heard that day that was actually one of the most impactful for me was from Vinci, our founder. And she came on, and I was just so enthused by what she was doing, because I had not only lived mistakes in my travel experience in the past, but I had also seen mistakes made in terms of environmental responsibility and community-driven travel, and really ensuring using travel as a tool for good and a tool to increase a more equitable and sustainable world. I wanted to do that more. I wanted to both learn how to do it more. And I had also, started to sort of dabble in like community-based travel experiences myself. I was riveted by Vinci, and basically right after I joined, asked if I could potentially use my skills as a writer to help out. Wasn't entirely sure how I was going to do it. I was a newbie to the travel industry, but had been writing about travel for years. And I just kept being engaged, essentially, is why I kept volunteering, because it was not just an experience for me to both learn how to be a better traveler, but it also became an experience for me to grow skills that I have never experienced, play around with podcast editing and then script writing, and, then really, falling into my niche of creating blogs for creating content for our blog, and then editing the content for the blog as well. So I've kind of gone through this transition and gotten to sort of play around with so many things that I'm both interested in skill-wise, and also learned so much in the process. And this team is fantastic. And it's just such a great experience and so uplifting to be around them.
I totally forget that you dabbled for a minute as a podcast editor for us.
Yep.
Oh gosh. Well, so what I love too is the beautiful thing about being a volunteer organization is we do get to allow opportunities for you to learn new skill sets, try new things. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. It's a-okay. And so I think that's one of the reasons, that's a lifestyle value that's really aligned for me with being here at Rise. But I'm curious, how does your lifestyle values align with Rise, and what impact does that really make on you?
Absolutely. So I sort of have always, both in my personal life and then I try to extend it in my professional life as a writer as much as possible, but I always wanted to ensure that I was uplifting others in some capacity. And I have this sort of mini mantra that I always tell myself that if I just affect one life in a positive way, I've made a difference. And then every single day I try to increase that number one more.
Yeah.
It's sort of a small step, but I keep growing and hopefully I've impacted someone in a positive light or done good in this world in some form. Rise is a opportunity to do that, but also, to go deeper and not just have that, one person to person initiative, but really work in communities to ensure that when we travel somewhere, we are not just traveling for ourselves. We're not just even traveling to be nice to the, hotel receptionist, but when we go out, we're impacting whole communities by uplifting some of their community-driven initiatives and whole ecosystems by going through and trying in any way that we possibly can to make a difference there. I also love that for Rise, it's all, I've learned a lot about how to sort of use certain vocabulary and ensure that, I wasn't doing this out of, a lot of times as a writer, especially when you are always writing in your own voice, sometimes it can sound a little godlike.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I kind of started to learn through them that, it's not about me. It is about simply me. It is about those people who are leading these initiatives on the ground and me just being behind the scenes and supporting in any way I can possible, but not being that person. It's something that I've now have not just taken in my personal life, but also to my professional life, in terms of trying to ensure that I always take my voice out of it a little bit more and uplift diverse voices in anything that I do. So I've tried to be better, obviously work in progress, but that's one thing that Rise has really taught me.
I love that. Well, and I think, your experiences that have helped you be a writer, that have helped you been able to really form a voice, but also, I'm going to say a stage or a place for other voices to be heard. And the thing that always impressed me about, a lot of our content creation team meetings is if there is a concern or if there are questions, that's a space for us to ask. And we may not have even framed the question in a very correct way. And then for someone to be able to walk us through that process to help us rewrite some of the thinkings and some of the positions that I went to journalism school too, that we were really taught in journalism school of how to write and how to look at things. And it's just so interesting. I think you've always been an amazing writer and you still are an amazing writer, but you're also a really great teacher because I think you've been able to summarize a lot of the things that you've learned and you turn that into a guide for some of the new content creators on our team. And again, I think it was because we were able to have that space to do that learning and growing together.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So then talk to me a little bit. This might be kind of quickly changing gears, but I know you're going to bring this back because you're really good about doing that. I know that you had an experience of working with refugees in Greece. And so I am kind of curious, what was, the life learned positive experience from that? What, as you got into learning what you've learned here at Rise and sat and were able to reflect on that, what would you have done differently? And I think sharing that would be really, really great for our audience.
Absolutely. So yeah, I've shared a bit of this with you offline, I know in our personal
Mhm.
lives, but so I got involved in working with refugees. Let's see, it was the beginning of the Syrian refugee crisis. I'm blanking
Okay.
on the exact timetables in terms of years. But I was just starting out in journalism. I was writing sort of culture articles at the time, but as
Yeah.
part of my work, I had to always be scouring the news for new stories.
Yeah.
And I was doing a lot of clickbait stuff, and my life changed when I saw this. It was just a something shared on social media that somebody had shared that they actually went on their own and just started helping Syrian refugees.
Oh, wow.
Completely, changed their career mindset. And I think the person had somewhat content creator background as well, but had just
Yeah.
left and gone.
Okay.
So I was thinking of ways to sort of do more with my skill set and help others. And also just, I was sort of fed up with the like rat race and clickbait that I had been doing at the time.
Yeah.
So I left after a bit. I first went to Serbia for a very short trip, and then through that experience, got some contacts and was able to go volunteer in Greece for an organization called Together for Better Days.
Okay.
They had been doing a amazing new project called Elpida Home, where they were assisting, ensuring that refugees had agency. So these, going to a refugee camp is definitely a sobering experience. But when you walk in, essentially for no reason whatsoever, who was just a random person engaged, who came here with no necessarily caregiving background,
Yeah.
I somehow was given more agency than the people in the camp. And that felt so wrong to me. I
Okay.
could, for example, I could talk to a guard and I could say, hey, this person needs some products from the store. I want to take them out of the camp for a moment to go get those products. They'd listen and say yes. They would not do that for other people. It
Interesting.
was such a study in my own sort of white privilege. And I had just, landed with my American passport and suddenly had all of this power that I
Yeah.
really shouldn't have had.
Yeah.
Um, but what we were doing at Elpida Home in Greece was to actually sort of co-manage this home for refugees. That was, we had taken a facility and we sort of retrofitted it. And then the volunteers were managing the camp in coordination with those who were living in the camp, meaning that they took on, we had, group meetings where we discuss how the camp would be managed.
Yeah.
Things like food, things like clothing drives was all
Got it.
done in
Yeah.
tandem with the people there.
Oh,
They would be cooking their own food, which we would provide. We would go to the store and get the food, and they would, they would cook their own food because they're like, yeah, we're amazing chefs, and we want to cook our
yeah.
own
We don't
food.
need you cooking for us.
Yeah, we don't need you for this. Just give
Yeah.
us access to a kitchen. So little
Yeah.
things like this really improve the living situation. And then on top of that, there were activities every day, some of which
Okay.
I helped with, including like teaching English and this sort of
Yeah.
stuff.
Interesting.
So it was a life-changing experience, but also an experience that really showed me my privilege as a traveler and sort of the
Yeah.
different dimensions of travel. That, travel for pleasure is something we talk about a lot, but there's also migration, which is something that is not, as it's framed in the media, a bad thing, but simply part of life,
Yeah.
especially with things like climate change. It's just going to continue, and we're just going to have to adapt,
Yeah.
and hopefully be good human beings to our people who are coming in. The fact that I could get up any day and be a digital nomad in a country, but other people
Right.
could not do that, was extremely sobering.
Yeah.
That changed my whole outlook on everything. It's part of the reason why I found Rise. It's part of the reason why I very quickly pivoted careers and actually
Yeah.
worked with refugees for months, years after that in New York City as well.
Yeah.
So it changed my outlook everywhere. The one thing I would have potentially done differently, though, as I look back on this experience, is I think
Okay.
going into it, I hadn't planned necessarily for spending, for example, like a year there or,
Yeah.
at least 6 months there.
Okay.
Long term, when you're going to do a volunteer project, it has become immensely clear to me that it should be more long term so that you're
Yeah.
really working with people and really able to make a sustainable difference.
Yeah.
Um, Looking back at it, it's like I had freelance to provide for the month and a half that I actually got to be there.
Right.
But if I had thought it through a little bit further, I could have actually planned more freelance gigs, plans
Yeah.
different ways to be there, created that flexibility so that I could be a more sustainable member of that
Amazing.
camp infrastructure and essentially do more good for these people because relationships are built, and every time there's a change in volunteers, those relationships go away, and that can be really hard for everybody involved. And that's something I learned also through these experiences, that while I continued my work with refugees, while it was extremely impactful in my life. And, we certainly could make a huge difference in people's lives in an emergency situation. I still wish I could have done even more and planned further to ensure that I could have been there longer.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. And really, I've been in the nonprofit space for a while, and when we talk about micro volunteering, that
Mm-hmm.
is definitely a different mindset than really going in deep and building those relationships and being a part of that community that's creating this amazing opportunity for these people. But also, you are right. Like the turnover in volunteers is hard. The turnover in staff is hard in a situation like that. And
Yeah.
those people have been through enough that really turned over their lives. So is there that way to create that sustainable volunteer in place? And if that's something that is in your heart and you really want to explore, I think that's really great advice to really think through. Like, what can you do? What can you adjust in your life to make this more of a year-long commitment instead of just
Mm-hmm.
a month?
Yeah.
And I think that's giving us something really, really great to think about. One thing that, all right, I'm going all over with you, so sorry.
That's okay.
One thing that I kind of want to go back to, because you mentioned about, just worrying about getting clicks and likes and engagements and
Um,
stuff. You really are. You're a content creator at heart. You've done it in many different ways on many different platforms, representing many different organizations throughout the years. So I'm curious, when you pair that with the future of travel and the travel industry itself, how do you see the future of content creation in the travel industry of tomorrow? Or what would you want to see?
That's a fantastic question. And I have lots of thoughts.
Yeah.
Um, So, some positive things that I have seen is that I just recently saw a publication, for example, change their listicle format to mean something more. We, for years, as travel content creators, have done 10 best places to go on vacation next year, or 10, 15 best beaches. That has led to a lot of over tourism. It gets a lot of clicks, which is why it's so popular. I mean, as a traveler, yeah, I do want to know the best destinations to go to. I see why it works. However, it means that people end up going to the same places. They don't
Right,
really get out of their comfort zone, and it leads to, like I said earlier, just a lot of over tourism in these areas.
right.
I've seen that form be dropped a little bit more, and I'm loving it. I'm loving what I'm seeing. It's encouraging. I've seen places change that form and do, okay, what about list of places where you shouldn't actually go because you
Oh,
are leading to
making a
over
negative impact.
tourism and making
Yeah.
a negative impact on the environment. That's a cool flip of that narrative and I'm really excited by that. It's like you're still using a form that people are comfortable with, that's digestible to an audience, but you're using it for good. And I'd love to see more of that in terms of travel content.
Yeah.
Also, things that are a little bit more long form. This is something we
Yeah.
talk about in the content
Yep.
and news
All the
world
time.
all the time, because it's becoming a more and more short form world. And that's just the nature of social media and things that we live in. But I have seen a lot of really great posts about community driven initiatives that are long form, but that are engaging, and that, I think in if we really want to think about this in a viable as a sort of viable plan for somebody's content, I
Yeah.
would, of course, it might be coupled with some additional short articles. However, having that space to actually make an impact and really spend time with the community so you can speak to what they're doing in whatever cool tourism initiative they're leading is incredibly impactful, at least for readers like me, and I think for others too. So it's worth doing it and maybe coupling with those easy share things as well. So that, of course, I know people, need the revenue streams too. But
Right.
I've loved seeing some more of that long form content that really doing deep dives into these locations. And I think it also encourages the traveler to do more deep dives into locations
Well, and I
rather than
think
just
that's
see the
that's going to
trends.
be the direct result. Exactly.
Hmm.
Right. And so it really is, as content creators, guess what? We get to recreate that experience for the reader. And if we
Hmm.
all band together and are willing to do those deep dives, those really looking at the multiple layers of an issue and talk through it through our written pieces and our video pieces and things along those lines, then yeah, the world's going to have to change with us and they're going to have to read the content and really engage with it. So I do think you're onto something. And I kind of feel like, is this kind of something that as content creators, we can all kind of stand together and start doing? But yeah, I don't know. I'm curious to see how this plays out. You point out a really good point.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to see, if this trend continues and people do have the time and space, even with Rise, we've moved towards things like ebooks, which are fantastic because it allows somebody to really engage with material in a whole different way and learn so much by the content we're putting out.
Right.
It requires a lot of work and effort and, many, many hours in a day, as does any long form piece of content, but it's so worth it when you actually get to read it.
Right.
And I'm hoping that readers appreciate that.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we are getting to the top of our time together today. So thank you again, Cara, for joining me. And thank you for all that you've done over the years at Rise and for being such a fun volunteer friend to work with on the content creation team.
Likewise, Amy.
But that does bring us to the end of our journey today. If you're listening to this interview and you love what you've heard and you want to hear more, please subscribe, like, and comment. You can follow us at Rise Travel Institute on Facebook or Instagram. If you're also hearing these conversations with our volunteers and you want in on some of the work that we're doing, you have something that you want to bring to the organization, or if there's something that you want to learn from us, please check out our volunteer section on our website. Because here at the Rise Travel Institute, we really do believe in conscious travel and that it can help us create more than just a more just and equitable world. And so if you're a college student planning to study abroad, a tourism professional who wants to create a more equitable or inclusive industry, really anyone who is currently traveling and really wants to understand how to travel in a more just and sustainable way, I really encourage you to head over to risetravelinstitute.org for more information on our educational programs. So we'll be back with another episode soon, but until then, keep roaming, keep learning, and continue to be a Rise traveler.